Okay, we've hopefully looked at the first demo, which would be how we make our comic book lettering balloons. So this demo is going to be actually how we start setting the text into our balloons. So we're going to use some different tools for this one. We're going to use our toolbox here, but we're also going to be using our character palette as well. And we'll show you how these all work in a couple of seconds. First thing that we want to do is know what tool that we're actually going to use to set the text. And it's going to be our type tool, which is this capital letter T. Now, I can actually click on the page and it gives me that blinking cursor that you see right there. And that blinking cursor, I can start typing my text. But the thing is that when I start typing it in there, make this bigger so you can see it. And when I start typing it in there, it creates one long line of text. And if I want my whole sentence on one line, well then that's fine. But in comics you'll notice that they don't really type them like that. That I actually would have to insert returns in on everything in order to get it to flow correctly. What I want to do actually is not type on one long line of text, but I'm going to type in a type called a text box. So if I select my type tool and I click and I drag, see how it creates a box? That now when I put my text into it, it's not all on one long line of text. And if I click on the corners of it here, I can adjust the size of that box and see how my text then reflows. So now I could put this into smaller boxes if I want, or I can adjust the size of the text so that it fits the box that I've created. Just by adjusting the size of the box. Now, something else that we want to pay attention to with the text is what we call our text alignment. If you look right here, you'll notice that everything is even on this side and it's kind of uneven on this side. That's our text alignment, and by default it's set to what they call flush left or align left. In comics, however, we want a nice kind of, since it's all visual and creating visual interest, we want a kind of a nice text flow, so our text alignment should always be centered. And see how when I change it to centered, it's now not even on one side, it's going to be even based off of the center going outwards, and now it allows it to flow kind of more comfortably in here. I could adjust my text box a little further. And it now allows me to give it a nice kind of even sides to everything. Now, some of the most common questions that get asked with lettering is, it's really two. What point size, meaning how big the letters are, and what font should I use? Well, as I'm going to show you in another demo, when we actually start putting this all together on the actual comic pages, we're going to be lettering on our page as it would, look when it's finally printed, which is 6 inches by 9 inches. So we're not actually lettering on our full size 11 by 17, we're lettering on the final size. So how big should the point size be? If I'm lettering it on the final size, it should be about 8 points in size. If I'm lettering it on my 11 by 17, it should be about 11 points in size. So for this, since we know it's going to be 8 points in size, we're just going to head and set this to 8 points. Now, the other question, what font do I use? Well, we don't want it to look overly computer rendered. So back in the day, comics were actually hand lettered, and according to the handout that I gave you guys, I talk about how it was hand lettered and what that process was. We want it to look that way so that it looks like an actual comic book. It's just that we're doing it digitally. So there are lots of different fonts that reflect hand lettering that you can choose from. And one website, well, there's lots of websites, but one in particular, Blambot, BLAMBOT.com, has plenty of free fonts that you can download and lots of really good dialogue ones. And one of the ones that you can use, the one that I personally like to use, is Letteromatic. Letteromatic. And see how now it changes the font so it looks like a hand-lettered comic book. And again, that's what we're trying to present ourselves as, is we're trying to present ourselves like a real comic book, so we want to do it just as the real comic book people do. So I use Letteromatic. Letteromatic also has 3 types in the font family: regular, italic, and bold. We would use these to emphasize words because when we speak, we emphasize certain words more than others. And since we're trying to capture the illusion of speech, we may then select some words and emphasize them more than others. So I might select these words and emphasize them so that they stand out a little bit more to reflect that emphasis of different words. Some of them have an italic version, and Letteromatic has one as well. I find that its italic version, though, doesn't really stand it apart too much from the regular version, but I see this really, really clearly. So I tend to emphasize with bold rather than italics. Now, there are other fonts that you can use as well that, again, reflect handwritten fonts. One is called Digital Strip, and it looks like a handwritten font as well. Oops. And it also has italic and bold that we can use, but I think this one is a little too straight. And still looks a little too structured like a computer did it. There's also one called Anime Ace that it also has a nice kind of look of a hand-lettered font, but I find in this particular one it creates some awkward kerning issues. When I talk about kerning, I'm talking about the space between the letters. See how close the letters are to one another? I find in this particular font, Anime Ace, where it looks really, really nice, the A sometimes creates some awkward kerning issues, spaces in between letters. I find it happens a lot with the T, and see how it puts the T where it's almost touching my Y at this point, and the A almost is touching the L at this point. So I find the letter A and the T and sometimes the B will push letters either too close or too far away from one another. So it's just a personal choice that I don't like these kind of awkward spaces in kerning. I like Anime Ace, but I don't like how it does those kind of awkward kerning issues. So I stick with Letteromatic, but again, you can just kind of want to use what you prefer to use. So we have our font that we're going to use, Letteromatic, and we have it set at 8 points. And again, real quickly, my type tool is what allows me to type my text. I click and drag and create a text box, so that's where I put my text in. I can then adjust the size of the text box so that it fits my dialog balloon. And with my text selected right up here at the very, very top, that's when I can change my font, change its point size, change its paragraph alignment, all that kind of good stuff. So with my font centered like this, let's change this back to lazy. The other thing that I want to take into account is how it sits in my dialog box. So right now it's in my dialog box, but it's really kind of open up in here. I don't really want that too much. I want it to fit comfortably within the dialog box. So if I keep in mind that the dialog box is going to be covering up artwork, well, that's another reason why I'd kind of want this to fit really comfortably around my text box or dialog balloon, so that my dialog balloon is a nice size comfortably around my text, so that I'm not covering up quite so much of my illustration. And see how just by having it in center alignment and then adjusting the size of my dialog box to fit it a little more comfortably, I can now actually change it so it's not really covering up so much of my artwork as it was before. Usually what I see as most common mistake is when people start lettering is that they try to put it all on one line of type, like so. And then they'll take their dialog balloon and they'll make it fit. And you don't want to do that for what I would hope is obvious reason. It looks kind of squished. It creates this kind of awkward negative space at the top of the bottom. And seriously, have you ever seen a comic book that's lettered like that? Probably not. So you don't want to letter yours like that as well. Again, really comfortable. You want it to be nice and centered text, nice handwritten text, 8 points in size, emphasizing certain words to create that illusion of actually spoken words, and your text balloon, your dialog balloon, fitting really kind of comfortably around it. Now, one other thing is that sometimes you're going to create sound effects, and sometimes you may even want to change the font from a dialogue text to something that reflects the personality of the character. Remember, we're telling a story visually, and we want to create visual interest, and we can also do that through our text. This is what they call dialogue text, so it's, normal speaking voices. But say we wanted to have a robot. Well, I could create this square kind of panel box, dialog balloon, to reflect that this is a mechanical voice of some kind, but I'm using normal dialogue text. So that makes it sound as if the robot sounds just like you and I. Well, maybe we don't want him to kind of create that impression. So I might actually have on my computer some more creative fonts as well. Blambot has tons of them. And as you can see, you can select some that maybe will change the personality of what it is that our character is speaking. So again, if I change it to this more robotic, very angular looking font, and it's from a robot, then changing the font helps create the personality of that as well and lend itself to the character and to the visual story that we're telling. Same thing with, say, if the character is the bad guy of it, then I might change that font again to reflect the character not speaking in a normal kind of voice. Let's increase that so you can see it. And see how now I can change it so that the font itself reflects the speech of the character. I'm going to tighten up the leading here so that you can fit in there nice and quickly. Let's zoom in. And see how now I can totally capture a different personality of the font. And if we go back to kind of what we touched on with creation of word balloons, if I were to change the look of this balloon now, using a particular brush effect, now it can create a whole different kind of appearance of this particular character because I have a font and this kind of sketchy sort of look and a sketchy looking kind kind of font that it creates this now personality that matches the character that I'm creating, and again captures visual interest. So that's pretty much how we set text in Illustrator. And this isn't just for Illustrator. These rules are going to apply for Photoshop or Manga Pro or any of the comic book creation fonts that software rather that are out there. We want centered text. We want it to be 8 points if we're lettering our final version, a 6x9 version. Centered text, 8 points in size. Nice dialogue text like Letter-O-Matic. And some special fonts to create some sound effects or set different kinds of moods for different characters. And that's going to apply to all the different softwares that we use. So thank you very much. And the next one I want you to look at is how we actually start putting it all together using Adobe Illustrator.